June 6, 1944. Normandy Beach burns under the gray morning sky. A Sherman tank named Fury takes a direct hit. The crew bails out, smoke fills the air, and the mission seems over. But one man refuses to give up. He's no officer, no engineer, just a mechanic with a wild idea. An idea so crazy, it would change the entire course of D-Day. This is the story of Sergeant Curtis Culin, the man with a blowtorch who saved the Allied invasion. Normandy, France, 6 days after D-Day. The beaches are secure, but the Allied advance has ground to a halt. Not because of tanks, not because of artillery, but because of hedgerows. These weren't the cute backyard hedges you trim on a Sunday. They were ancient barriers, walls of earth, stone, and tangled roots that had stood for centuries. Some were 15 feet tall, 10 feet thick, and so dense that even artillery barely scratched them. Normandy was a maze of these natural fortresses, and every field was a battlefield of its own. For American tank crews, they were death traps. Every time a Sherman tried to climb over a hedgerow, its nose tilted up, exposing its thin belly armor, the weakest point on the tank. German soldiers waited on the other side, weapons ready. The moment that belly appeared, boom! One shot, one kill. Over and over, Sergeant Curtis Culin of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron watched this nightmare unfold every day. Tanks burning, crews dying, progress stopped dead. What had looked like an easy push inland had turned into a blood-soaked stalemate. Culin wasn't an engineer. He didn't have a degree or any fancy training. Before the war, he was a car mechanic from New Jersey, fixing engines, welding frames, making things work with what he had. But mechanics are problem solvers. They understand force, leverage, and how to make stubborn machines do the impossible. And one day, as another Sherman burned in the distance, Culin had a revelation. The problem wasn't the hedgerows themselves, it was how tanks approached them. They were trying to go over the hedges when they should be going through them. If a tank could cut through the base of a hedgerow, tear it open at ground level, it would never expose its belly. It could punch straight through while keeping its strongest armor facing forward. But how do you cut through 10 feet of packed earth, stone, and roots? Culin started sketching in his notebook. Rough, messy lines of steel and angles. His crew laughed. "There goes Culin again," they said. Trying to solve the war with his little doodles, he ignored them. He'd seen too many friends die to let this problem go. Culin went to his commanding officer, Captain Samuel Morrison, with a wild idea. He wanted to take a damaged Sherman tank, weld 4 steel prongs to its front, made from the steel obstacles the Germans had placed on the beaches, known as Czech hedgehogs, and use it as a plow. The tank would ram full speed into a hedgerow. The prongs would dig deep, slice through roots and dirt, and create a hole big enough for tanks and troops to pass through. Morrison stared at him. "Let me get this straight, Sergeant. You want to take a wrecked tank, weld junk to its front, and drive it head-on into a wall of earth?" "Yes, sir," Culin said simply. "Our tanks die trying to climb over. Let's try going through instead." It was insane. But Morrison saw the logic, and more importantly, he saw Cullin's determination. "You have 48 hours, he said. "If it fails, we'll both be court-martialed." Culin and his crew went to work. They scavenged the beaches for scrap steel, cutting apart rusted German obstacles under the moonlight. Sparks flew, torches hissed, and the smell of burnt metal filled the air. By dawn of the second day, a Sherman tank stood ready, its front bristling with 4 massive steel tusks. Soldiers gathered to watch, laughing and whispering bets. "Looks like a pig trying to mate with a porcupine," one joked. Culin just smiled. "Maybe so, but this pig's about to root through every hedgerow between here and Berlin." The next morning, the modified Sherman lined up in front of a massive hedgerow. Officers stood nearby. Culin held his breath. "Let's see if you're a genius, or a lunatic," Captain Morrison muttered. The tank roared to life, gears grinding, engines screaming. Then it charged. The impact was thunderous. Earth exploded in every direction. For a heartbeat, the tank stopped dead, buried in roots and soil. Then, inch by inch, it began to move forward. The prongs dug deep, cutting through centuries of growth. And then it broke through. The Sherman burst into the open field beyond, its belly safe, its crew unharmed. The soldiers watching erupted into cheers. The impossible had worked. One test wasn't enough. Culin knew that. To prove it worked, it had to survive combat. The next day, the modified Sherman, now nicknamed Rhinoceros, rolled toward a German strongpoint. Culin rode inside. Rain fell in gray sheets. Ahead lay thick hedgerows and enemy guns. "Steady," he told the driver. "Hit it at an angle. Let the prongs bite." The tank hit the hedge like a battering ram. Roots snapped like bones. They burst through, straight into a German machine gun nest. The gunner fired once. The Sherman's cannon answered, blowing the position apart. It worked. Again and again, the Rhinoceros tore through hedgerows the enemy thought impenetrable. Infantry poured through the openings, advancing behind it. Within hours, the German defenses crumbled. For the first time since D-Day, the Allies were moving again. Word spread fast. Within days, reports reached General Omar Bradley himself. His message was simple. Build 5,000 of them. Immediately. Tank depots across Normandy turned into makeshift factories. Welding crews worked around the clock, chopping up beach obstacles, attaching prongs to hundreds of Shermans. Culin was pulled from the front lines to train new crews. He went from soldier to teacher, traveling camp to camp, showing others how to replicate his design. "The angle's everything," he'd say, chalking lines on tank hulls. "Too high and you tilt up, too low and you dig in. Get it just right, and you'll cut through anything." Before long, the Culin Hedgerow Cutter became standard equipment. New tanks rolled off American assembly lines with attachment points pre-built. His once crazy idea, now official doctrine. As the Allies broke out of Normandy and raced across France, the cutters found new uses. They smashed through stone walls in towns. They cleared snow in winter battles. They even pushed aside wrecked vehicles blocking narrow roads during the Battle of the Bulge. The simple device, born in desperation, became a multi-tool of war. Culin never stopped improving it. He listened to field reports, encouraged modifications, and incorporated every good idea. Genius, he'd say, isn't about being right the first time. It's about listening and adapting. But victory came with a cost. Culin couldn't ignore that his invention made tanks deadlier. Faster, more efficient at killing. He told a chaplain once, "I built a tool to save lives. But it kills too. I don't know how to feel about that." War isn't simple. Progress never is. His device saved thousands of Allied soldiers, but it also ensured the death of countless Germans who thought they were safe behind those hedges. General Bradley called Culin's invention one of the most significant tactical innovations of the Normandy campaign. He awarded Culin the Legion of Merit. Promotions followed. Fame too. But Culin never got comfortable with it. "I just welded some metal to a tank," he'd say. The real heroes were the ones inside those tanks. When the war ended in 1945, Culin went home to New Jersey. No parades, no speeches, just a quiet garage, fixing cars again. He never bragged, never told his neighbors what he'd done. When asked, he'd smile and say, "I was just a mechanic." He didn't mention that his idea helped liberate Europe. Years later, historians tracked him down, astonished by how humble he was. "You changed tank warfare," one told him. "You saved thousands of lives." Culin shook his head. "I wasn't special. I just saw a problem and fixed it. The special part was that they let me try." Curtis Culin died in 1963. His obituary was small. It called him a mechanic, a veteran, and a quiet man. It didn't mention that he'd changed the course of World War II, But in museums across the world, Sherman tanks still stand with steel prongs welded to their fronts, rusted reminders of his brilliance. A plaque beside them reads, "The Culin Hedgerow Cutter, an invention that helped win the Battle of Normandy." One man, one torch, one crazy idea. Sometimes that's all it takes to change history. If this story moved you, share it, because heroes like Curtis Culin remind us that brilliance doesn't always wear stars on its shoulders. Sometimes it wears a mechanic's uniform and holds a blowtorch.